All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Today, we are going to be doing a session on an introduction to Therefore Online. For those of you who may not be familiar, you may know that Therefore is an information management system. However, we do offer it in the cloud as well. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, sort of taking a look at specifically Therefore Online, so our cloud version, how it differs from the on-premise version, and some more details about that. So before we get started, we would like to introduce ourselves. So there's going to be two of us from the Therefore team today. My name is Kono. I'm head of digital engagement at Therefore, and I'm joined by my colleague Amber.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
Perfect. So before we get started, just a small housekeeping thing. With our webinars, we absolutely welcome your questions and we're happy to answer them at the end of the session. However, everyone on the call is muted, so if you have a question, please use the Q&A function within Zoom to ask your question. And as I said, we'd be happy to address these questions at the end of the session. So now I'm going to pass it back to Amber, who's going to tell us more about today's agenda. Amber?
Awesome. Okay, so what we're going to look at today is what is Therefore Online, the data centers and system architecture, data management with Therefore Online, and an application overview, and we'll finish it off with some technical FAQs. We know a lot of you on the call are already familiar with Therefore, but just to quickly review for any newcomers, Therefore is a software that allows you to maximize the usefulness of your information. That's your documents, forms, photos, CAD files, whatever. It's an enterprise-grade technology service platform, and it allows you to do a couple things. It allows you to better classify documents, increase your flexibility, automate business processes, and manage strategic information and business documents. But how? Well, there are three major functions of Therefore software, and that's managing information as an asset, running and optimizing business processes, and gathering business analytics. So what is Therefore Online? Therefore Online is everything Therefore, like Therefore information management system, but in the cloud. So it's all the benefits of the Therefore tools, but without the local infrastructure. And that's super important because it can often take weeks or months to plan, buy, build, and implement an internal IT infrastructure. And when it's within the cloud, the infrastructure is all ready to go and it's managed by professionals. So why is it the smart choice? Well, it gives you operational agility and scalability, which I think are kind of linked together. It also reduces costs. It'll improve your security as well as improve accessibility. With operational agility, one of the main things is the automatic software updates. So cloud computing suppliers, in our case, Microsoft Azure, they do the server maintenance, including the security updates, free up their customers' times and resources to do other things. The second that a company needs to increase the bandwidth or the amount of data that they need, the cloud-based service can instantly meet that demand because of the vast capacity of their own remote servers. And that kind of links into scalability, and it gives you enhanced competitiveness through scalability. It allows small and medium businesses to access enterprise class technology. So it allows those smaller businesses to act faster than the big established competitors that they're up against. So the on-demand scalability grows or shrinks with your needs very quickly, which is really important for those smaller businesses. It can reduce costs because the pay-as-you-go model is predictable. It can minimize on-site server infrastructure, IT staffing requirements that you'd need for an on-premise server, and those big lump sum capital expenditures. So because cloud computing services are typically pay-as-you-go, there's no need to have a set-aside emergency fund for if something goes wrong. And because it's much faster to deploy cloud computing services, The businesses have minimal project startup costs and, like I said, a predictable ongoing operating expense. You also have improved security. So rather than relying on your own internal like IT team, in our case, we work with Microsoft Azure. So you're having Microsoft level security, and that's like physically on the ground at these data centers, and then also the software security that goes along with that. And then the increase in accessibility is essentially wherever you have the internet, you have access to your cloud service. You're there for a repository, which just gives you that extra flexibility. So how is Therefore on-premise different from Therefore online? Well, with Therefore on-premise, the data is located at the customer location. But with Therefore online, the data is hosted at a data center, like I said, with Microsoft Azure. Therefore on-premise has multiple editions. Those are Workgroup, Essentials, Business Enterprise, and they all have different licensing rules. Therefore online is a lot more streamlined. There's one edition with uniform licensing rules. With Therefore on-premise, backup is managed by the customer. So if they don't back up their system and something goes wrong, that's on them, but it's obviously an upsetting thing. With Therefore online, it's automatic geo-redundant backup, which is a huge safeguard for any business. With Therefore on-premise, software assurance purchase is required, and that is the maintenance agreement to get support and updates as like a separate thing, but it is required. With Therefore online, the software assurance is included with your subscription, so it makes it super easy. And with Therefore on-premise, it is a perpetual license, whereas Therefore online, customers are able to access their tenant and data for the terms of their subscription. However, that data is theirs, and the data can be exported at the end of the term if they decide they want to do something else with it. So now we're going to go on, and Kona's going to tell us about data centers and the system architecture behind Therefore online.
Right, so this next part, I wanted to get into some of the more technical details. So Amber gave us a nice high-level overview about Therefore Online, what it is, sort of the major differences between Therefore Online and the Therefore on-premise version. Now I want to get into the specifics of Therefore Online. So first thing I wanted to talk to you about is the data centers and the system architecture. So at Therefore, we're quite transparent about the way we run Therefore Online. Of course, we feel that it's important for us to be clear and for our customers to know exactly where their data is stored and how it's processed. So Therefore Online is a global system. We have data centers all over the world. As Amber mentioned, we are working with Microsoft within their Azure platform. And we do have different regional data centers. Within each region, data is copied to both data centers. You may notice there's 2 dots for each region. And this is done in case there's some kind of large-scale accessibility failure at one of the locations. It just makes sure that we have a good level of redundancy. What's important to know is that the data stays within the customer's region. It's never transferred to another region. So for example, here in the US, our US customers are only keeping their data in the US, in the 2 US data centers. It's never transferred to another region. And likewise with other regions, they're never transferred to other regions. So the data centers here in the US are located in Virginia and Iowa. For our friends up north in Canada, the 2 data centers are in Toronto and Quebec City. And then throughout the world, we have 2 data centers in Europe, Ireland, and the Netherlands. We have 2 in India, 2 in Australia, and in Southeast Asia, we have a pairing in Singapore and Hong Kong. So what about the architecture overview? Again, we mentioned that Therefore has partnered with Microsoft, which is, of course, leading global IT service provider. And this is where we host the operations and the infrastructure for Therefore Online. Obviously, using a professional data center allows us to optimize the performance and security of Therefore Online to the fullest extent. So we just want to make that clear. That's not running on, like a self-hosted sort of system. It is running on Microsoft Azure. So customers can be assured that all of their data will be held within the Microsoft Azure data center in their respective region. And what's really important to know is that virtualization technology that is using virtual machines on physical hardware, this is the underpinning of both Azure and therefore Online's architecture. Therefore, Online is highly suited for this because it's a multi-tenant system. That means that a single instance of the software running on a server in the data center can be securely provisioned among multiple clients who are going to connect to it. This configuration also has the additional benefit of allowing security updates and software upgrades to be planned centrally and managed by Therefore. So again, it's a stress-free, worry-free experience for our customers. And of course, we take advantage of all of the Microsoft defense that they have within their data center. Of course, that's all rolled into the package that Therefore offers. What you see here is a simplified diagram, of course, of how the Therefore Online system looks like. So understand this is more of a technical thing. So I tried to simplify this and explain a little bit more. But basically, this is basically the open internet here, what we're looking at. So this is where our customers are connecting to Therefore. And the virtual system architecture is basically made up of these three layers that you see here. The first layer is called this DMZ, or literally demilitarized zone. This is a technical term, nothing to do with the military. This is for the front end web services, which means traffic that's coming in actually from the outside. Then really everything that's running within Therefore, so the application and the database and the storage is all behind this wall here. So the application layer, there are two virtual machines that are available in a failover cluster. A failover cluster is essentially two servers running in parallel. If one of them has some kind of issue, it kicks over to the other. So it should be a almost seamless transition in case there's a crash or something like that, so that we can offer very high availability. The third layer, this is where we have a virtual machine running the SQL Azure databases and the reporting services. And basically, this configuration is very similar, if not the same, to what you would use in a Therefore on-premise system. It is, of course, a very redundant way to do it. It's a very safe way to do it. And of course, one of the main aspects here being this DMZ layer here, which protects the system from traffic coming from the outside. Another important thing to understand with Therefore Online is that it's a multi-tenant system. So this means that within each system, there are multiple tenants. So imagine it like an apartment building that has apartments in it, right? So there's the big building and then there are multiple apartments in it. Yes, people are in the same building, but you have your walls around you and you're completely separate. What's important to know is that a tenant's data is only accessible to that tenant's user, and each tenant belongs to the main regional Therefore Online system. There are no sub-tenants. We understand that some Canon products you may be familiar with work with the concept of sub-tenants. That is not the case for Therefore Online. So there are only main tenants. And as I mentioned, there's no connection between the regional systems. There's absolutely no way they are physically and logically separated. No way for data to go between regional systems. And again, same thing, there's no connection between tenants as well. Another thing that people ask us a lot about is management, security, things like that. That's totally understandable when you have your data residing outside of your local IT environment. It's a concern, right? Even though cloud computing has gotten a lot more common within the past few years, it's still a major concern for a lot of people, especially people in industries who perhaps have more regulatory compliance, or who are dealing with confidential documents and things like that. So this is why we're going to include this here to tell you a little bit about how Therefore manages security and data management. Of course, it goes without saying that Therefore Online has been designed with security as a primary focus. One of those aspects is, of course, data encryption. So, of course, all data within the system is encrypted. We use Azure Secure Storage Encryption, storage service encryption, which is used to encrypt data at rest using 256-bit AES encryption. Data at rest is of course, when the data is actually sitting on the hard drive, right, on the physical drive in the storage. And while the data is in transit, it is encrypted using HTTPS and SMB 3.0. I mentioned earlier this DMZ layer. Again, this is the only part of the system that can be accessed externally. No data is stored on here. It is just used as a relay for sending or retrieving data from the application and database layers, which is where the data is actually stored. These the application and database layers cannot be accessed directly from the outside, for example, by a hacker. And to ensure maximum security, only secure connections are allowed to the system. So I mentioned earlier that data in transit is encrypted using HTTPS. For FTP over TLS file transfers, we use this for the Therefore content connector, which is one of our applications that you can use to upload documents to Therefore. And Secure Socket is for our connections with multifunctional devices. Secure network design is also another big part of the security of Therefore. So I mentioned that Therefore Online is running on virtual machines within Azure, and every virtual machine running in the system is protected by a firewall. And then inbound from the internet, the Azure DDoS protection helps shield against large-scale attacks against Azure. Public IP addresses are used to determine which traffic can pass through the cloud service to the virtual network. And network isolation, which is native to Microsoft Azure, and other tools are used to create security boundaries and protection in the application deployments. I also want to mention that Therefore Online is audited every single year by an external company that has absolutely no relation to Therefore or any of our affiliates. So it's an audit done by this team that sits. Usually takes about 2 weeks, if I remember correctly, and they report any findings to us. So you can rest assured that Therefore is again checked on a regular basis to make sure that our security standards remain up to date. Then when it comes to data backup, this is another important thing. Of course, again, as I mentioned, when you don't have your data sitting on your infrastructure, on your servers, there's the concern what's happening to it. You can be sure that data within Therefore Online is redundantly backed up in the data center. The data is copied to multiple disks. So these are like in the data center physical disks. So the data is copied to multiple disks in case one fails. The customer data remains intact. Customer databases are stored in SQL Azure with redundancy systems that are handled by Microsoft. And all the data in Therefore Online is protected and backed up by these two concepts here. So LRS is locally redundant storage, and GRS is globally redundant storage. Primary storage is LRS enabled for the highest performance when you're saving and retrieving documents. Data which is saved here in the primary storage is replicated across 3 nodes, and each of which are further replicated several times. On the other hand, our backup is in this GRS. So again, in the secondary data center. So for example, here in the US, this would be in Virginia or Iowa in the secondary one. It's again replicated 3 times. It is replicated asynchronously over here. And what this means basically is that it's a highly redundant configuration. It means that there's dozens of copies of the data that is kept across multiple secure storage locations. And as I mentioned before, the advantage of the globally redundant storage is that the data remains protected even in case there's a complete regional outage or a disaster in which the primary data center is not recoverable. Hopefully that will never be the case, but in case it is, well, Therefore Online has hedged that bet. And then another one, data migration, of course. So if there's a request to migrate data off of Therefore Online, it can be migrated at the contract end, or if you're switching, for example, to an on-premise solution to Therefore on-premise happens sometimes. Some customers choose to move to on-premise. You can do this with the export utility, which is a tool that Therefore offers for this. You can export the documents as well as the metadata. And upon completion of the customer contract, once the data is migrated, the tenant is deleted, and all the data is securely erased. This applies to Microsoft as well, so they have very strict standards for overwriting storage resources before they're reused, as well as physical destruction of decommissioned hardware. So that was all the technical jargon. Amber, I'm going to hand it back to you to maybe tell us a little bit more
Awesome.
about the application, like the licensing and what this actually means about getting it in customers' hands.
Perfect. Yeah. So again, Therefore Online is a full-featured information management solution. And in addition to it providing intelligent information management, it also comes standard with workflow functionality, which is an awesome tool that enables organizations to optimize their business processes by automating their workflows. The Therefore Online system and the functionality of it are pretty much indistinguishable from the on-premise solution. The only major differences between on-premise and online is where the customer's data is located. So moving on, we're going to talk about licensing. Therefore Online is offered as a single edition, nearly identical to business and enterprise editions that are available with the on-premise version of Therefore. It's subscription-based. It has the option of choosing either a monthly or yearly plan, highly scalable and customizable, as I mentioned earlier. It allows you to make changes to the system as the business dictates, as time goes on and things fluctuate. Customers can begin with just a single user license if they choose, and then add as many as they need throughout the terms of their contract. There are a number of user licenses, named users, concurrent users, and read-only users. So named users are licenses that are specifically assigned to an individual employee for their use only. It is named to them, it's theirs. And this type of license is for users who regularly need access to the system. Concurrent user licenses it's a user license that's shared amongst all the users of the system, excluding those named user licenses. So when a concurrent user logs onto the system, they essentially borrow a license from the sister system server pool, and then they return that license automatically when they log off. If all of the available licenses are currently being used by other users, the additional users trying to get in will be denied access until an active user logs off the license. And then there's also read-only license, and kind of makes sense. It's a license that's designed for customers who would like to offer users very limited access to their documents. They'll only be able to read or view those documents. So those are the three main user licenses. There are also additional licenses like the capture client, the multifunctional printer license, as well as third-party integration licenses for SAP, Exchange, and Business Central. Now I'll pass it back to Kono to go over some technical FAQs.
Yes, thank you, Amber. So we are reaching the end of today's session. It looks like we're on time. That's awesome. But there are, a few technical FAQs I just want to go over. These are questions that are commonly asked when we talk about Therefore Online. So the first one is pretty basic. Does Therefore Online require a constant internet connection? Yes. So therefore, it's important to note Therefore Online is not a hybrid system where you can do some activities offline. You really do need an internet connection to perform most system actions. So that's definitely needed to make use of Therefore Online. Do you need any special software to access Therefore Online? No, if all the normal Therefore client applications work, so there's no difference with that. There isn't anything specific that you need to access Therefore Online. You can access it using the Therefore installed client, web client through a browser, mobile app, all the same ones that you would use with regular Therefore. Where and how is the data stored? We went over this pretty extensively, but just as a recap, both the documents and the metadata are stored in the regional data center, and all of it is backed up both in the local data center and the backup data center, which is in a different geographic location. How do I integrate with a third-party database? So this is a question that comes up often because with Therefore Online, you cannot integrate directly with an external database. That doesn't mean that there's no way to do it. We do have a document called Best Practice to Connect to an External Database, which gives very clear instructions on how to use something that we call table replication. Now, I'm not going to get too much into that because it's not the focus of today's webinar, but essentially what you're doing is you are configuring your database table in such a way that you can use it within Therefore Online, even if you don't have that exact direct connection between Therefore Online and the database table. And along the same vein, question of can you access the SQL database directly to create tables? For security reasons, of course, we don't allow this because the SQL database is, again, in that database layer, which is behind the DMZ. However, you can, as I mentioned, use table replication to work with database tables in Therefore Online. So this is definitely possible. It just requires a slightly different configuration. Another one that comes up often enough is how do you integrate with a third-party ERP? So Amber showed on a previous slide that we have some native integrations, for example, with Microsoft Dynamics Business Central, with SAP, with Microsoft Exchange, things like that. Of course, there are plenty of systems out there that we don't have native integrations for. However, there's the answer to can Therefore integrate with product X is probably yes. Usually, if an integration exists, that's great. If not, then it's most likely possible. There's lots of options for doing that. You can create an integration with the Therefore API. You can use this aforementioned table replication. You can also use REST calls within Therefore if your third-party system has a REST API. So lots of possibilities for doing that. Can Therefore Online integrate with Office 365? Of course, everyone uses Office, and most people are using Office 365 nowadays. So definitely, definitely possible. Therefore, it works very well, plays very well with Office programs. Integration with local. So if you have Word or PowerPoint or whatever, Excel installed on your computer, that works totally fine. An integration with the browser-based Office 365 apps like Word Online, those things that, the actual Office apps that are within your browser, that's going to be available very soon. It's coming in April 2023. So really good news on that front. Can I move from an on-premise Therefore system to Therefore Online? Absolutely. A lot of customers are doing this nowadays. Actually, so much so that we have documents showing you how to do it on your own. So this is something that is definitely possible to do, that the customer, with support from their Canon representative, should be able to do. Or, if you'd like to outsource that, it can be performed by the Therefore team as a paid service. But it's definitely possible. It's not that complicated, and there's a lot of advantages to doing it. So before we let you go, I'm going to get to your questions. But before I do that, I just wanted to mention there is an upcoming webinar. So thank you for joining us today. There is a really awesome webinar coming up in exactly 1 month called The Power of Therefore Workflow. This webinar is about the workflow function in Therefore, but specifically why? Because Therefore was recently, and I mean November of 2022, was rated as the #1 solution for workflow automation among a group of 14 ECM products, including tons of competitors that are all very highly known by all of us, and therefore was rated as the #1 for its workflow process automation features. So we're going to have a webinar to talk a little bit about why Therefore workflows provide such a high value, and we're able to beat out the competition. So if you're interested in this webinar, it's going to be really awesome. We're going to be talking about really like Therefore's best, most standout feature. It's going to be a month from now, March 23rd, same time, same place, Zoom. And if you can sign up for that if you visit therefore.net/webinars.